Sarah loved spring mornings, the kind where the air was still cold when you opened the window, but the sun had already started warming the curtains. She always knew Owen was awake before she heard him. He would sit up in bed first. Then he would call for Max. The dog would come running down from upstairs and knock him over. Owen would laugh. Max wouldn't bark, just pant. The two of them would lie on the floor like that for a few minutes. Every morning was the same. Sarah liked it the same. David came down before her. He made the coffee. By the time Sarah got to the kitchen, her cup was already on the table, still steaming. Sarah never thanked him. David never waited for it. Their house was a house like that. Things didn't need to be said. Owen came down a little after. He brought something with him every morning, a toy, a book. He never remembered what he was carrying for very long. "Mom," he said one morning, "Max doesn't have water." Sarah looked at the bowl. It was full. "He does, baby. Look." Owen looked at the bowl, then at Sarah, then at Max, then back at the bowl. It took him a second to register the water. "Oh, he does." He patted Max on the head and walked off to the bathroom. David looked at Sarah across the table. He smiled a little. Sarah smiled back. Neither of them said anything. That was Owen. 5 years old, but only half here. The other half was somewhere else, in his own head, in his own game, in some world only he knew about. The doctor had said it was normal for his age. Sarah had believed it. His scattered little mind was his own. It was what made him Owen. They had gotten Max from a shelter 2 years before. Owen had been 3. He had pointed at the one asleep in the corner of the kennel and said, "This one." That was all. Max had been with them ever since. Sarah sometimes tried to remember a house without Max in it. She couldn't. At night, Sarah put Owen to bed. David stood in the doorway. Owen would hug Max first. Max would lie down beside the bed. Owen would ask for a story. Sarah usually made one up. One night, after the story, Owen looked up at her. "Mum." "Will you be here tomorrow too?" Sarah laughed. "Where else would I be, baby?" Owen thought about it. "I don't know. I'll be here tomorrow, every morning." "Okay." He patted Max's head. His eyes started to close. Sarah kissed him, dimmed the light. As she walked toward the door, Owen murmured, "Mum." "Max? Max is with you, baby. He'll always be with you." "Okay." Owen fell asleep. Sarah closed the door softly. David was still in the hallway. "You okay?" Sarah nodded. David leaned in, rested his forehead against hers. "We're lucky," he said. "Very." The opera was on a Friday night. David had bought the tickets months earlier. Sarah had forgotten about them. When she came home from work that Friday, the envelope was on the table. "Oh my God, is this tonight?" "It's tonight." "David." "Surprise." They called a sitter. A girl from down the street. 19. She had come twice before. Owen had liked her. Sarah put Owen to bed early. He looked up at her. "Mum, are you going somewhere?" "Dad and I are going out. We'll be back before you wake up." "Who's the sitter?" "The girl from down the street." Owen thought about it. Nodded. "Okay. Good night, baby." "Good night, Mum." Max was already by the side of the bed. Sarah dimmed the light, closed the door. The sitter arrived. They left. They made it to the opera in time. The hall was dark. One woman on the stage. Sarah settled into her seat. David's hand was beside hers. She took it. The music began. The soprano was singing an aria. Sarah didn't know much about opera, but a voice like that up close was something else. The soprano's breath seemed to reach every corner of the hall. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. The aria was building toward its peak. She felt it, like everyone else. The woman on the stage drawing her breath. The note held. A vibration in her purse. She didn't notice. The soprano was holding the note. David's pocket vibrated too. He didn't hear it. The bass was loud. The hall was full. The music was everywhere. The soprano was still holding the note. The police were calling. They had been calling for some time now. No one heard. The aria ended. Applause. Sarah stood up, clapped. Her eyes were shining. That was beautiful. David nodded. Beautiful. They looked at their phones in the lobby. They saw it at the same time, froze at the same time. The funeral happened. Sarah dressed, went, came back, remembered nothing. Max had come home alone the next morning. A neighbor had found him by the side of the road and brought him back. He had walked into the house, gone up the stairs, and lain down outside Owen's bedroom door. He stayed there. The weeks after the funeral were a blur. Sarah moved through rooms without seeing them, sat on the floor sometimes, lay on the bed for hours without sleeping. She opened the refrigerator occasionally. She didn't remember eating. She didn't remember much. David was there. He brought her food. She ate some of it. He didn't speak much. Neither did she. In the first days after the funeral, Max stopped eating. Sarah noticed. She put fresh food in his bowl. Max didn't touch it. She left it. The next morning she scraped it out and put new food in. Max didn't touch it. She did this for a few days. Then she stopped doing it. Max wasn't eating anyway. Whether the bowl was full or empty, he wasn't going to eat. Sarah told herself this, somewhere in the back of her mind. She didn't quite say it out loud. She just stopped going to the bowl. Food became one of the things she meant to check. Water, too. Then the day would pass, and she would realize she hadn't. She would tell herself she'd do it in the morning. Max stayed by Owen's door. He didn't get up much. When Sarah passed him, she sometimes put a hand on his head. His eyes would open, then close. He didn't lift his head. She thought, he's grieving. She thought, he'll come around. A few weeks passed. 2 weeks after the funeral, David found Max. The dog was still outside Owen's bedroom door. David knelt down, put a hand on his side. The dog was cold. David sat there for a moment, his hand on the still fur. Then he picked Max up to carry him out to the garden. That was when he felt it. Max was too light. The fur hid it. A golden retriever's coat hid a lot. But David was carrying him now, and his arms knew. Max should have been heavy, solid. David had carried him to the car a year ago, when Max had hurt his paw, and he remembered the weight in his arms. This was a fraction of that. David stood very still in the hallway, holding the dog. He thought distantly that he should put him down. He didn't put him down. He stood there for what felt like a long time, with this lightness in his arms before he made himself move. He took Max out to the garden. The ground was hard. It took him an hour to dig the hole. He didn't ask Sarah to help. He didn't tell her he was doing it. She was somewhere upstairs, in a room with a door closed. When he was done, he came back inside. He went into the kitchen to wash his hands. The bowl was on the floor by the cupboard. David hadn't looked at the bowl in weeks. He hadn't thought about it. It had never occurred to him. Feeding the dog was something that happened in the background of his life. Something Sarah did. Something he had never had to think about. He looked at it now. There was old food in it, a small amount, dried hard against the bottom. The top of it had a faint green film. Whatever had been put there a long time ago. David stood at the sink, his hands wet, looking at the bowl. He thought about the weight of the dog. Then he thought about the bowl. He thought Max wasn't eating anyway. He thought Max was grieving. He thought maybe he would have died anyway. He couldn't tell if it was true. He couldn't tell if it was a lie he was telling himself. He stood there a long time. Then he picked up the bowl, walked it to the trash, threw the food away, washed the bowl, dried it. He didn't put it back on the floor. He put it in a cupboard, high up, where Sarah wouldn't see it. Then he went back upstairs. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at nothing. David sat down next to her. They didn't speak. A few days later, Sarah noticed Max wasn't in the house anymore. She asked David where he was. David said he had taken him out to the garden. Sarah nodded. She didn't ask anything else. She cried that night, but she knew she wasn't crying for Max. She was still crying for Owen. She did not think then or later about the bowl. David tried to stay. A few months, maybe 4, maybe 5. Sarah didn't count. He would wake up early, make the coffee, set it on the table. The cup would be there when she came down, steaming. Sarah didn't thank him. David didn't wait for it. But David couldn't look at her either now. He had buried the bowl in the cupboard, but he knew it was there. Every time he opened that cupboard for something else, he saw it. He started not opening it, started using mugs from the other cupboard. Then he started not using the kitchen at all. He understood slowly what living here was teaching him. If he stayed long enough, he would stop seeing things. Like the bowl, like Max, like eventually Sarah. He didn't want to learn that. One evening, David sat at the table. Sarah sat across from him. Neither of them was eating. Sarah? David tried to speak, said something. Sarah didn't hear it. She could hear his voice but couldn't make out the words, as if David was speaking another language. After a while, he stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. The next day, David packed a bag. Sarah watched him. He said something about needing time. A while, a week, a month. He didn't know. He just couldn't breathe here. Sarah said she understood. She did. She didn't blame him. David stood at the door, looked at her. I'll come back. Okay. David left. The first week he called every day. The second week a few times. The third week once, then never. A few months later the divorce papers came. Sarah signed them. No one called from the other side. The money ran out. Sarah wasn't working. She couldn't. The rent went unpaid. The landlord was understanding. He waited 2 months. Then he wrote her. I'm sorry, someone else will take the place. She packed her things, left most of them. Owen's room was untouched. She didn't know what to do with that room. In the end, she closed the door, left everything in it. She didn't have the strength to take it with her. The new place was in a neighborhood behind the train yard. Cheaper, older. The super opened the door with an apology on his face. Ma'am, the place is a little rough. It needs some work. It's fine. There's damp. Coming through the windows, I think. When it rains, the smell gets bad. It's fine. He hesitated, looked at the wall opposite. And that wall. Last tenant said something about the stains. They keep coming back. We've painted twice. They come through? Sarah looked across the room. Brown stains spread across the plaster. Scattered. Old. Some were small. Some had bled outward into wider, darker patches. It's fine. The super gave her the key. Left. Sarah stood in the middle of the empty room. Her things hadn't arrived yet. It was just her and the stains. She looked out the window. The train tracks were visible. A freight car was being shunted, moving very slowly. She turned back to the wall. "I need to paint that," she said out loud. Her voice sounded foreign in her own ears. She never did. The first weeks passed. Sarah built a routine. Get up, make coffee, not drink it, sit down, go to bed. She had learned not to stay in bed too long. In bed, she thought, thinking was dangerous. She spent most of her time in the living room. There was one chair. The wall was across from it. She didn't look at the stains at first. It was just dampness in an old building. You could ignore it. But there was no television. She didn't answer her phone. Looking out the window was hard because of the trains, so her eyes went where they had nowhere else to go. One evening her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A text from her sister. "Sarah, please call me back. I'm worried." It had been the 5th or 6th message that month. There were others before it. Sarah read it, put the phone face down, walked back to the chair. She had stopped opening the texts a while ago. Some of them mentioned a name, a therapist someone had recommended, a grief group, a church. She didn't read those parts. She didn't read any of it, really. She just saw who had sent it and put the phone down. One evening she noticed something. One of the stains was shaped a certain way. Sarah followed it with her eyes. A dog, she thought. She almost laughed. The brain did this, found shapes in everything, faces in clouds, animals in carpet, a dog in damp on a plaster wall. Then her eyes moved to another stain, a child. She almost laughed at that too, but after that, she couldn't look anywhere else. One Saturday night, while she was making tea, she heard a sound. Sarah froze in the kitchen, the cup in her hand. A woman's voice, somewhere far, singing, a high, clear voice with reverb in it, like opera. It sounded familiar. The neighbor must have the radio on, she thought. The sound went on for a few seconds, then stopped. She put the cup down. What song was it? She tried to remember. She couldn't. It had been familiar, but it was a familiarity she couldn't place. She went back to the living room. The shapes were still there. She didn't sleep much that night. A few days later, she started sitting closer to the wall. First, she pulled the chair over. Then she got out of the chair and sat on the floor. The shapes were getting clearer every day. No, the shapes weren't changing. She was just looking more. She told herself this. She didn't believe it. What she could not see, sitting that close, was that the stain she called a dog had grown by an inch over those weeks, and the stain she called a child had spread downward in a way it hadn't done before. And between them, where there had been nothing the week before, a small dark line had appeared, low and curved, where a hand could be if a hand were drawn there. One evening, the two shapes were side by side. The dog's head was next to the child's, as if they were leaning on each other. Sarah put a hand over her mouth. That was how Owen and Max used to sleep. That night, Sarah dragged her bed into the living room. The doorbell rang one afternoon. Sarah didn't hear it at first. Then it rang again. It was midday, light outside. Who could it be? She got up, went to the door, opened it. The super was there. "Ma'am, everything all right?" Sarah looked at him carefully. "Yes. We haven't seen you in a few days. One of the neighbors was worried." "I'm fine." He tried to look past her. Sarah had only opened the door a little. The apartment behind her was dark. "Anything you need? The store, maybe?" "No." "All right." He nodded. Left. Sarah closed the door, went back to the living room, sat back down. She was woken in the middle of the night by a sound from the wall, The same woman's voice. Opera. But longer this time. Sarah sat up, listened. A note was being held. Held. And then a faint tremor moved through it, as if something had slipped. A second. Then the sound stopped. She sat in bed for a long time, her back to the plaster, the wall behind her, the sound behind the wall. She didn't sleep again. Sarah was living in front of the wall now. The bed was there, the cushion, a glass of water, a plate. She wasn't eating much anyway. A slice of bread, a little cheese. That was enough. Her phone was on silent. She had stopped looking at it. The super came once more. She heard him at the door. She didn't get up. He waited, left. He didn't come again. She watched the wall for hours now, sometimes whole afternoons passing without her moving from the cushion. The shapes were very clear to her. Owen was there, head bowed, as if he were looking down. Max was there. Next to Owen, his head resting on Owen's arm. That is what Sarah saw. What was actually on the wall was damp, dark stains spread in patterns her mind kept arranging into the shapes she needed. The stains had moved over the weeks. They had grown. The line she had once seen as a thin shadow at the edge was now wider, darker, reaching further into the room. It had happened slowly enough that she had missed it. She started talking to them. "Owen." No answer. "Owen, look. I'm here." No movement. "Owen, Mom is here." Silence. She cried one day, for a long time, then stopped, because no matter how long she looked, no matter how much she talked, she could not see herself beside them. She tried to picture it in her head. Owen, Max, and her between them. The three of them side by side. But the picture wouldn't form. Owen and Max were there in her mind. But Sarah could not enter the picture. She realized this one evening. She wasn't surprised. She had always known it. She couldn't go to them, because she didn't deserve to be there. Another night. The music came again. Sarah was sitting in front of the wall. The music started, the same woman's voice. This time she didn't get up. She listened. The sound began, held. Then it started to stretch. The high note went thin. Then it climbed higher than a human throat could hold. Then it slipped. The pitch dropped, but not all the way down. It hung somewhere in the middle, somewhere wrong. The voice grew heavier, as if a machine were singing now, not a woman, then heavier still. The note pulled itself out long, longer than any breath, until it didn't sound like sound at all. Then it stopped. The sound hadn't come from anywhere, not the neighbor, not the radiator, not the trains. It hadn't come from anywhere. Sarah looked at the wall. The shapes seemed turned toward her now. Owen's face was still bowed, but his shoulders were toward her. Max's head was up. The stains had grown again slowly beneath her gaze, but the change was small enough that her eye let it pass. She reached out. She couldn't touch them, of course. The wall was too far, but she reached out. "I can't be with you," she said quietly. The wall was still. "I don't have the right to stand next to you." No answer. She didn't cry this time. There was nothing left to cry with. Then the music came again. But this time it wasn't broken. It was clear. A woman holding a note. Like the opera, like the stage, like real. Sarah froze, because now she knew. Now she knew completely. They had been at the opera. David had been beside her. The soprano had been holding the note. The phone in Sarah's purse had been vibrating. Right then. The phone in David's pocket had been vibrating. Right then. The police had been calling. She hadn't heard. The soprano had been holding the note. She had not been able to hold it in her head that night. Now she was holding it. Now everything was clear. Owen had been opening the door at that moment. She knew it now. The sound she had heard all year, from the wall, from the radiator, from the trains, that was the sound. The sound from that night. She had heard it that night. She had carried it home in her head from the opera, when the police called, when she answered, when she got the news. The sound had already been inside her. She hadn't recognized it because she couldn't. She hadn't been there. But somewhere underneath, something had taken the sound and tied it to Owen. All year, the sound had been there. She had refused it. She had heard it from the wall and said the neighbor. She had heard it at night and said the radiator. She had heard the music break and said something otherworldly. Because if she recognized it, she would have to accept. That night, she had heard the moment of her own son's death and not noticed. She could not accept that. Now she was accepting it. She turned her head from the wall to the mirror. The mirror was across from her. It had been there for months. She had leaned it against the wall on the day she'd moved in. Then she had forgotten about it. She had never looked at it. She looked at it now. The mirror showed the living room, the wall opposite. The shapes were still there, Owen and Max. From the angle of the mirror, the wall looked deeper, as if it was pulling inward, and the mirror showed Sarah, sitting on the cushion, turned toward the wall, alone. She was not next to them. She looked at the mirror a long time. Then she understood. From the angle of the mirror, she would need to sit against the wall, her back to it, the shapes on either side of her, for the mirror to place her with them. She stood up slowly, walked across the room, put her back against the wall, sat down on the floor, looked at the mirror. There were 3 of them in the mirror. Owen on her right, Max on her left, Sarah between them, side by side. She saw for the first time in her life, for the first time since Owen had died, saw herself beside them, not in her head, in the mirror, actually there. She closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered something Owen had said the night he'd gone to bed. "Mum, will you be here tomorrow too?" she had answered. "I'll be here tomorrow, every morning." It was a promise she hadn't kept. She was keeping it now. She opened her eyes. There were still 3 of them in the mirror. The wall behind her felt different now. Not cold. She couldn't say what. She looked at the mirror one last time. Owen, Max, and between them, her. "I'm coming," she said. She closed her eyes. The room was quiet. The mirror reflected the wall opposite. The damp had spread further than before. The stains had no clear shape now, just a darker mass against the plaster, older, wider, bleeding into each other. The mirror also reflected a woman. She was leaning against the wall, her back to it, her eyes closed. The room was very quiet. Owen had walked out into the street in his pajamas. Max was somewhere ahead, past the yard, chasing a cat or a shadow in the dark. Owen had opened the door and looked out. "Max!" he called. Max didn't hear. Owen went out. The night was cold. His feet were bare. Maybe he didn't notice the cold. Owen's mind was like that, drifting from one thing to another. Now it was on Max. Everything else was background. The train tracks were at the end of the street. Owen hadn't been there much before. It was off limits, but Max had gone that way. Max! Owen got to the edge of the tracks. Freight cars were stopped, a long train, being shunted, moving very slowly. So slowly it looked still. Owen stepped between the rails. He thought he had seen Max there, or heard a sound, or a shadow. Owen's mind was already half there, half somewhere else. Now it was somewhere else completely. Max! A car was coming, very slowly. Owen looked sideways. Max wasn't there. He looked ahead. The car was close, still slow, but close. Owen looked up at the last second. His face changed. He made a small sound. One syllable. One note. High. Sarah was at the opera. The soprano was holding her note. Sarah heard the sound. She did not recognize it. Months passed. The new tenant was a man in his 40s. He came alone, carried one suitcase. The super gave him the key. He went inside. He stood in the living room, an empty room. There were damp stains on the wall opposite. He walked up to the wall, bent down, looked at the stains. "That's gone past damp," he said. "That's mold." He called the super. "How long has this been like this?" "A while, sir. We've painted twice. It comes back." "Did anyone live here recently?" The super thought about it. "A woman. She lived here for a while. Stopped paying rent. We had to clear the place out." "Right. I'll get a painter. I'm not living with that." The next day the painter came, looked at the wall. "You're going to need primer, 2 coats. Whatever you need." The painter worked through the morning, sanded the worst of it, primed the wall twice, then painted. The stains were faintly visible after the first coat, gone after the second. The wall was white. "That'll hold a year, maybe 2, the painter said. "It'll come back. This kind of damp does. I'll deal with it then." The painter packed up his buckets, left. The new tenant stood in the living room a moment, looked at the wall, bright white, nothing on it. "That'll do." He went into the kitchen. He filled the kettle, set it on the stove, took a mug from the cupboard, looked through his phone while the water heated. The kettle clicked off. He made his tea. He sat down at the small table by the window, looked out at the street. A train was being shunted somewhere in the distance. He could just hear it. He drank his tea. Then he started unpacking. The wall was a wall. Just a wall.